What if I told you that some real Wild West towns never completely disappeared? Hidden across America, these abandoned places still stand with empty streets, forgotten homes, and over a century of history. Some visitors come for the history, while others leave talking about the strange feeling these towns still carry. Today, we're counting down 10 real Wild West ghost towns that still exist. Stay until the end, because the final location has one of the darkest histories in the American Wild West. 1. Bodie State Historic Park 1859. The first time I drove toward Bodie, I honestly thought I had taken the wrong road. The desert felt endless, and the silence became heavier with every mile. Then, almost without warning, old wooden buildings appeared on the horizon. It didn't look like a movie set. It looked like a town that people had simply walked away from and never returned. Bodie began after gold was discovered here in 1859 by William S. Bodie. Years later, the rich discoveries of 1876 transformed this isolated place into one of California's busiest mining towns. At its peak, nearly 10,000 people lived here. There were hotels, schools, churches, saloons, gambling halls, and hundreds of homes. Standing there today, it is difficult to imagine that so much life once filled these empty streets. As I slowly walked through the town, I noticed that many buildings still contained furniture, old bottles, rusted tools, and broken dishes. Looking through dusty windows almost felt like interrupting someone's life. Time had not completely erased Bodie, it had simply stopped it. The wind was the loudest sound around me. Every time it pushed through the wooden buildings, the old walls creaked. It was easy to understand why so many visitors leave saying the place feels unsettling. I never saw anything supernatural, but I could definitely feel the weight of the town's history. Knowing that thousands of miners, shopkeepers, and families once dreamed of building a future here made the silence feel even more powerful. One of the park staff explained that Bodie is preserved in what is called arrested decay. Instead of rebuilding everything, the state protects the town exactly as it has aged over the decades. That means every cracked wall, every broken window, and every weathered building tells part of the real story. Before leaving, I stopped near the old cemetery. The names on the weathered gravestones reminded me that this was never just a tourist attraction. It was a real community where people celebrated success, suffered tragedies, raised children, and buried loved ones. Mining accidents, disease, harsh winters, and fires shaped everyday life here long before the town slowly declined during the early 20th century. As the sun dropped behind the hills, Bodie became even quieter. The empty streets, abandoned homes, and fading light created a scene that no camera could fully capture. I understood why this place continues to fascinate historians, photographers, and travelers from around the world. The mystery of Bodie is not that ghosts definitely live here. The real mystery is how an entire town full of hope could rise so quickly, then slowly disappear, leaving behind only its buildings, its history, and the feeling that the past is still waiting in the silence. 2 Rhyolite 1904. The road to Rhyolite feels empty long before you reach the town itself. I remember looking across the Nevada desert and wondering how thousands of people once believed this lonely place would become their future. Then the old stone buildings appeared, standing quietly under the desert sun, almost unchanged by time. Rhyolite was born after gold was discovered in 1904. Within a year, miners, businessmen, and families rushed into the area, hoping to build a better life. New hotels, banks, a school, a train station, and even electric lights quickly turned the settlement into one of Nevada's fastest-growing mining towns. Walking through the ruins today, it is difficult to believe that this silent place was once full of noise, laughter, and endless activity. I stopped near the remains of the old Cook Bank building. Even after more than a century, its thick stone walls still dominate the landscape. The wind echoed through the empty windows, creating a low sound that made the entire building feel alive. It was not frightening because I believed something supernatural was there. It was unsettling because history seemed impossible to ignore. As I continued walking, I noticed broken foundations, rusted metal, and scattered pieces of the past lying across the desert floor. Every object seemed to tell part of a forgotten story. Someone once opened a shop here. Someone built a home here. Someone believed this town would last forever. The dream did not survive for long. After the financial panic of 1907, investment slowed, mining became less profitable, and people slowly began leaving Rhyolite behind. Within only a few years, businesses closed, trains stopped arriving, and empty buildings replaced busy streets. By the early 1920s, the town had become one of the most famous ghost towns in the American West. Today, many visitors say Rhyolite feels different after sunset. Some claim they have heard footsteps when nobody was nearby or noticed strange shadows moving between the ruins. These stories have become part of the town's modern reputation, but none of them have been proven. What is real is the history surrounding the place, and honestly, that history alone is enough to leave a lasting impression. As I walked back toward my car, I turned around one last time. The desert was completely silent, and the old building stood exactly where generations before me had left them. I realized that the true mystery of Rhyolite is not whether ghosts still wander its streets. The real mystery is how a town that once represented hope, opportunity, and success could disappear so quickly, leaving behind nothing but empty walls, fading memories, and a reminder that even the greatest dreams can vanish into the desert. 3 Cerro Gordo 1865. The road to Cerro Gordo is not an easy one. It climbs high into California's Inyo Mountains, leaving modern highways far behind. The higher I drove, the quieter everything became. There were no busy streets, no crowds, and no signs of everyday life. Only the old mining town waited at the top, surrounded by endless mountains and complete silence. Cerro Gordo began in 1865, when rich silver deposits were discovered deep inside these mountains. News spread quickly across the American West, attracting miners, businessmen, and adventurers who believed they had found the opportunity of a lifetime. Within a few years, the town became one of California's richest silver mining camps. Thousands of tons of silver and lead were pulled from the mountains, helping nearby cities like Los Angeles grow during the late 1800s. Walking through the town today, it is easy to see that Cerro Gordo was once much more than a collection of mines. Old wooden buildings still stand against the mountain wind. The historic hotel, abandoned homes, and weathered mining structures remind visitors that this place once held busy streets filled with workers chasing fortune. The deeper I looked into the history, the more I understood how difficult life really was. Mining accidents were common. Long days underground, dangerous equipment, and harsh mountain weather tested everyone who lived here. Some workers never returned home after entering the mines. Those tragedies became part of the town's history and helped create the mysterious reputation Cerro Gordo has today. Many visitors now describe the town as unusually quiet after sunset. Some have reported hearing unexplained sounds near the old buildings or feeling as though someone was watching them while walking alone. These stories are part of local folklore and have never been proven. Yet standing among empty buildings with nothing but the wind moving through broken windows, it becomes easy to understand why these legends continue. One building that always catches attention is the Old American Hotel. Even after more than a century, it remains one of the most recognizable structures in Cerro Gordo. Looking at its worn wooden walls, I found myself thinking less about ghost stories and more about the people who once gathered there after long shifts in the mines, hoping that tomorrow would bring another lucky discovery. As the afternoon sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, long shadows stretched across the empty streets. The silence became even deeper, and every abandoned building seemed to hold another untold story. Cerro Gordo does not need fictional monsters to feel mysterious. Its real history is powerful enough. It is a place where ambition built a thriving mining town, where danger was part of everyday life, and where the remains of that forgotten world still stand high above the desert, reminding every visitor how quickly fortune can disappear. For St. Elmo 1880. The road to St. Elmo is beautiful, but the closer you get, the stranger it feels. Tall mountains surround the old town, and the only sound that breaks the silence is the wind moving through the trees. Long before I reached the first building, I realized this place was very different from any modern town. It felt frozen, as if time had simply decided to stop here. St. Elmo was founded in 1880, during Colorado's mining boom. Rich deposits of gold and silver attracted hundreds of miners, business owners, and families looking for a better future. Within a few years, the town became one of the busiest mining communities in the region. More than 2,000 people lived here, and the streets were filled with stores, hotels, a school, a telegraph office, and the sound of trains arriving almost every day. Walking through St. Elmo today, it is hard to believe that so much life once existed here. Many of the original wooden buildings are still standing. Some look almost untouched, while others have slowly aged under more than a century of snow, rain, and mountain winds. Looking through old windows, I could almost imagine the miners returning home after long hours underground, hoping the next day would bring another lucky discovery. Life here was never easy. Winters were harsh, mining was dangerous, and accidents happened more often than people expected. When silver prices began to fall and the railroad eventually stopped operating in 1922, families slowly packed their belongings and left. Businesses closed one after another until the streets became completely quiet. The town never truly recovered. Today, St. Elmo is one of Colorado's best-preserved ghost towns, and with that history comes many local legends. Some visitors have claimed they heard footsteps inside empty buildings or noticed lights where no electricity exists anymore. Others say they felt as though someone was quietly watching them while they walked alone through the old streets. None of these stories have ever been proven, but they continue to be shared by travelers who visit after sunset. The longer I looked around, the more I realized that the silence itself creates most of the mystery. Every old building carries marks of real lives that once filled this valley with hope and hard work. Every empty doorway reminds visitors that thousands of dreams were built here, only to disappear when the mines could no longer support the town. As I left St. Elmo, I turned back one final time. The mountains stood exactly as they had more than a century ago, protecting the abandoned streets below. The wind moved gently between the old buildings, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the town was still waiting for its people to come home. Whether someone believes the ghost stories or not, one thing is certain: St. Elmo's real history is powerful enough to make anyone stop, look twice, and wonder what life was truly like in this forgotten corner of the Wild West. 5 Goldfield 1902. There is something unusual about Goldfield that you notice before you even step out of the car. Unlike many abandoned mining towns, this place still has massive stone buildings standing proudly in the middle of the Nevada desert. From a distance, it almost looks like a town that refused to disappear. But the closer I walked, the more I realized that its greatest days had been over for more than 100 years. Goldfield's story began in 1902, when rich gold deposits were discovered beneath the desert. News spread across America almost overnight. Prospectors, investors, merchants, and dreamers poured into the area, hoping to become rich. Within only a few years, Goldfield had grown into the largest city in Nevada. By 1906, nearly 20,000 people lived here. Expensive hotels, banks, newspapers, theaters, and luxury buildings filled the streets, making Goldfield one of the wealthiest mining towns in the entire American West. Standing in front of the old Goldfield Hotel, I found it difficult to imagine the crowds that once walked through its entrance. Today, the building is silent, its windows dark, and its walls worn by more than a century of desert winds. Even without knowing any ghost stories, the place has a strange atmosphere. Every empty room seems to hold pieces of a forgotten past. The town's success did not last forever. As the richest gold veins began to disappear, mining production slowly declined. Then disaster struck. A major fire in 1913 destroyed many buildings in the business district, causing even more families to leave. Businesses closed one after another, and the booming city slowly turned into a shadow of its former self. Because of its dramatic history, Goldfield has become one of Nevada's most talked about historic towns. The old Goldfield Hotel is especially famous for local paranormal legends. Over the years, visitors and investigators have claimed to hear unexplained footsteps, distant voices, or doors closing on their own. These stories remain unproven, but they continue to attract thousands of curious travelers every year. Whether those experiences have natural explanations or not, they have become an important part of Goldfield's modern reputation. As I continued walking through the quiet streets, I realized that the strongest feeling here was not fear, it was loss. Every abandoned building reminded me that this place once represented hope, ambition, and success. People came here believing they would build a better future, yet many eventually packed everything they owned and left behind the lives they had worked so hard to create. Just before leaving, I looked back one last time at the old hotel and the surrounding streets. The evening sun painted the buildings in deep golden light, making the town look alive for just a moment. Then the wind returned, the silence settled once again, and Goldfield became exactly what history remembers it as, a real Wild West boomtown whose greatest mystery is not the ghost stories, but how one of America's richest mining cities could fade so quickly into the Nevada desert. 6 Ruby 1877. The drive to Ruby, Arizona, feels like a journey into another time. The paved roads slowly disappear, replaced by rough desert tracks surrounded by hills and old mining land. The closer I came to the town, the quieter everything became. There were no crowds, no traffic, and no modern sounds, only the wind moving through abandoned buildings that have stood here for generations. Ruby's story began in 1877, when valuable deposits of gold, silver, lead, and zinc attracted miners to this remote corner of southern Arizona. Over the following decades, the settlement slowly grew into a busy mining community. By the 1920s and early 1930s, Ruby had become one of Arizona's most productive mining towns. Families lived here, children attended the local school, and businesses served hundreds of workers who believed the mines would provide a future for years to come. Walking through the town today, the old schoolhouse immediately caught my attention. Its empty classrooms, broken windows, and weathered walls quietly remind visitors that this was once a place filled with laughter and everyday life. Nearby stand abandoned homes, the old general store, and mining buildings, all slowly being reclaimed by the desert. Every structure tells part of a real story that has survived long after the people left. Ruby is also remembered for several violent crimes that took place during its early years. Armed robberies and deadly attacks at the general store became part of the town's documented history, adding another layer to its already difficult past. Combined with dangerous mining work and the isolation of the region, life here was never as peaceful as many hoped it would be. As mining production declined during the late 1930s, families began leaving one by one. By the early 1940s, the mines had closed, businesses shut their doors, and Ruby became a true ghost town. Nature slowly took over, but the buildings remained, preserving the memories of the people who once called this place home. Today, Ruby has earned a reputation as one of Arizona's most mysterious abandoned towns. Some visitors claim they have heard footsteps inside empty buildings or strange noises near the old school after sunset. Others describe an uneasy feeling while walking through the deserted streets alone. These stories remain local legends rather than proven facts, yet they continue to draw curious travelers from around the world. As the afternoon light faded across the desert, I stood quietly near the old school and looked across the empty town. It was impossible not to think about the families who once lived ordinary lives here, never imagining that their community would one day be abandoned. The silence did not feel frightening, it felt unforgettable. Ruby's greatest mystery is not whether ghosts still wander its empty streets. Its greatest mystery is how a town built on hope, hard work, and opportunity could disappear, leaving behind only empty buildings, forgotten memories, and a history that still echoes across the Arizona desert. 7 Garnet Ghost Town 1895. The road leading to Garnet winds through thick forests and quiet mountains in western Montana. Unlike many desert ghost towns, this place feels hidden, almost as if nature has been protecting it for more than a century. As I walked between the old wooden buildings, the only sounds were birds in the distance and the wind gently moving through the trees. It was peaceful, but there was also a feeling that this town had never completely let go of its past. Garnet was established in 1895 after rich gold deposits were discovered in the mountains. Like many mining towns of the American West, people arrived with one dream: to find gold and build a better life. Within only a few years, Garnet grew into a busy community with homes, hotels, general stores, blacksmith shops, and saloons. Around 1,000 people lived here during its busiest years, creating a small but active town deep in the Montana wilderness. Walking through Garnet today, it is easy to imagine what life once looked like. Many of the original log buildings still stand exactly where they were built more than 100 years ago. Looking inside the old cabins, I could picture miners warming themselves beside wood stoves after spending long days underground. Every building feels like a frozen photograph of another time. Life in Garnet was never easy. Winters were long and unforgiving, supplies often took weeks to arrive, and mining remained dangerous every single day. Despite the hardships, families built homes here, children grew up in the mountains, and businesses depended entirely on the success of the nearby mines. But when gold production slowed after the early 1900s, people slowly realized that the town's future was disappearing. By the 1930s, most residents had moved away, leaving Garnet almost completely abandoned. Unlike many ghost towns that were destroyed by fire or weather, Garnet survived remarkably well. Today, it is considered one of the best preserved ghost towns in Montana, allowing visitors to experience an authentic piece of Wild West history. Because the town has remained so untouched, local stories have naturally grown over the years. Some visitors say they have heard footsteps on empty wooden sidewalks or noticed lights reflecting inside buildings after sunset. Others describe a strange feeling of being watched while walking alone through the silent streets. These accounts have never been verified, but they have become part of Garnet's enduring reputation. As I stood outside one of the old cabins, I looked across the quiet valley and realized that the silence itself was the most powerful part of the experience. Every abandoned building represented real people who came here chasing opportunity, only to leave when the gold was gone. Garnet does not rely on ghost stories to leave a lasting impression. Its true power comes from its remarkable preservation and the real history still visible in every weathered log, every empty doorway, and every forgotten street. Long after the last miners left, the town continues to tell their story without saying a single word. 8 Belmont 1865. The road to Belmont, Nevada, stretches across miles of open desert where it feels like the modern world has completely disappeared. As I drove closer, I could see old wooden buildings standing alone against the dry hills. There were no crowds, no traffic, and no city noise. The silence was so complete that even the sound of my footsteps seemed unusually loud. It was the kind of place that makes you slow down without even realizing it. Belmont's story began in 1865, when rich silver deposits were discovered in the nearby mountains. News of the discovery spread quickly across Nevada, bringing miners, merchants, and investors hoping to build a new life. Within only a few years, Belmont became one of the busiest mining communities in the region. In 1867, it was chosen as the county seat, and new businesses, hotels, saloons, homes, and a large courthouse were built to support the growing population. The first building that caught my attention was the old Belmont Courthouse. Even after more than a century, it still stands proudly over the town. Looking at its weathered walls, I imagined the people who once walked through its doors, miners settling disputes, business owners signing papers, and families trying to build a future in one of Nevada's newest boomtowns. Life in Belmont depended almost entirely on silver mining. Every successful discovery brought hope, but every poor season created uncertainty. Mining was difficult, dangerous, and unpredictable. As silver production slowly declined during the late 1800s, businesses began closing and families quietly moved away. Streets that were once filled with wagons and busy conversations slowly became empty. By the early 20th century, Belmont had become a shadow of the thriving town it once was. As I walked through the abandoned town, I found myself thinking less about ghost stories and more about the real people who once lived here. Every broken window, every empty doorway, and every weathered building reminded me that Belmont was once filled with dreams of success. Families built homes, businesses opened their doors, and miners believed the silver beneath the mountains would secure their future. When I finally turned back toward the desert road, I looked one last time at the old courthouse standing alone beneath the wide Nevada sky. The silence felt almost unreal, yet it perfectly matched Belmont's history. Long after the silver disappeared and the people moved away, the town itself remained, preserving the memories of a forgotten Wild West community whose greatest mystery is not the legends whispered after dark, but the remarkable story that its empty streets continue to tell. 9 Chloride 1862. The first thing I noticed about Chloride was that it did not feel completely abandoned. A few people still live here today, but the moment I stepped onto the old streets, it felt as if the town belonged more to history than to the present. Weathered wooden buildings, old mining equipment, and faded signs quietly tell the story of a place that has survived while so many other Wild West towns disappeared. Chloride's story began in 1862, when silver deposits were discovered in the rugged mountains of northwestern Arizona. Within a few years, miners arrived from across the American West, hoping to strike it rich. The town officially grew during the 1860s and 1870s, becoming one of Arizona's earliest and most important mining settlements. Stores, saloons, hotels, blacksmith shops, and family homes quickly appeared, creating a busy community built around the promise of silver. As I slowly walked through the historic district, I could imagine the excitement that once filled these streets. Wagons carrying mining supplies would have passed through every day, while workers returned from the mines covered in dust after long hours underground. Looking at the preserved buildings today, it is easy to forget that this quiet place was once full of energy and ambition. Life here was never simple. Mining depended on uncertain markets, dangerous working conditions, and the constant hope of discovering richer ore. Some mines produced impressive amounts of silver, while others failed completely. Families who settled in Chloride faced harsh desert summers, limited resources, and the uncertainty that came with every mining season. Despite these challenges, the town survived when many nearby mining camps disappeared. Unlike most ghost towns, Chloride never became completely empty. A small number of residents remained, helping preserve its history for future generations. That is one of the reasons the town feels different. Instead of being frozen in time, it feels like history and the present quietly exist together. Over the years, local stories have added another layer to Chloride's reputation. Some visitors claim they have heard unusual sounds near abandoned mining areas after dark or experienced an unexplained feeling while exploring the old buildings. These accounts remain local legends and have never been verified. Still, standing among weathered structures surrounded by silent desert hills, it is easy to understand why such stories continue to be told. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, long shadows slowly covered the old streets. I looked one last time at the buildings that had survived more than 160 years of history. What stayed with me was not fear, but respect. Chloride is a reminder that the Wild West was built by real people willing to risk everything for a dream. Some found success, many did not, but the town remains as living evidence of their determination. Whether visitors come for the mining history or the mysterious atmosphere, they leave with the same realization: the greatest story hidden in Chloride is not a ghost story, it is the true history that still stands quietly in the Arizona desert. 10 Pioche 1864. The drive to Pioche felt different from every other old mining town I had visited. The hills surrounding the town were dry and rugged, and the streets climbed steeply between historic buildings that have stood here for well over a century. Even before learning its history, I could sense that Pioche had lived through something extraordinary. Every building seemed to carry a story that had never been completely forgotten. Pioche's history began in 1864, when rich silver deposits were discovered in the nearby mountains. Within only a few years, thousands of miners, merchants, and fortune seekers arrived, hoping to build successful lives in one of Nevada's newest mining camps. By the late 1860s and early 1870s, Pioche had grown into one of the most important silver towns in the American West. Hotels, saloons, stores, churches, and busy streets transformed the once empty desert into a thriving community almost overnight. But Pioche quickly became known for more than its silver. During its early years, the town gained a reputation for violence, lawlessness, and deadly conflicts. Historical records describe shootings, disputes over mining claims, and frequent confrontations that claimed many lives. Some historians even noted that dozens of people died violently before the town's first natural death was officially recorded. Whether every number repeated over the years is perfectly accurate remains debated, but there is no doubt that Pioche earned a reputation as one of the roughest mining towns of the Wild West. Walking through the historic district today, it is impossible not to think about those events. The old buildings remain remarkably well preserved, and many still overlook the steep streets where miners, business owners, and lawmen once crossed paths every day. Standing near the historic courthouse and the old mining structures, I found myself imagining how different this quiet town must have looked when thousands of people filled its streets. Because of its violent past, Pioche has naturally become surrounded by ghost stories. Local residents and visitors have shared stories of unexplained footsteps, strange sounds inside historic buildings, and unusual experiences after dark. These reports have never been proven, but they continue to be part of the town's modern identity. Whether someone believes those stories or not, the documented history alone gives Pioche an atmosphere unlike almost anywhere else in Nevada. As the evening light faded behind the mountains, the streets became almost completely silent. Looking back across the town, I realized that Pioche is not simply another abandoned mining settlement. Unlike many ghost towns that disappeared entirely, much of its historic center still stands, preserving the memories of one of the Wild West's most dramatic chapters. When I finally left, one thought stayed with me the entire drive home. The greatest mystery of Pioche is not whether ghosts still walk its old streets. It is how a place that once echoed with ambition, conflict, and the search for silver can now stand so quietly beneath the Nevada sky. Every weathered building, every abandoned mine, and every empty street reminds visitors that history often leaves behind its strongest stories in the places where almost no one lives anymore.